Bada boom, real show in the room. You are now tuned in to Jefferson Webster's YouTube channel. How you doing?
Hey everybody, Jefferson Webster here. I have a confession to make. I watch pro wrestling periodically. Yes, I'm ashamed to admit it, but you know what? Pro wrestling is hilarious, entertaining, and creative. And today I want to count down my favorite and least favorite wrestling video games. Let me call out a few caveats. I own a lot of video wrestling games, but I don't own all of them. So you won't see many Japanese games or that terrible N-Gage game on my lists. Second, I didn't include games that are not true wrestling games, so you're not going to see things like WWE Crush Hour or WWF Betrayal. Finally, this is my list, and yours may differ, so if it does, leave me your list in the comments. Alright, let's get started.
Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to JWW Jefferson Webster Wrestling. Let's go down to the ring and check out the action.
Whoa!
I'm the Shockmaster. Play these games if you dare.
This game was released by FCI on the Super Nintendo in 1994. Developed by Beam Software, this game has a lot of problems. The gameplay is clunky and stiff. Hit detection isn't great. To me, the best part about this game is the horrible promos in the wrestler selection screen.
Show me respect.
This game sucks. This game sucks.
Show me respect.
Who farted?
Who deserves?
In 2001, EA thought it would be a good idea to partner with Activision and release a Simpsons wrestling game. Initially, I was excited about this game. Historically, the TV series would periodically feature characters playing video games, so it seemed like a good idea.
I'll let you kill me in Bar Brawl 4, Final Fracas.
Well, it wasn't a good idea. Fortunately, it was only released on the PlayStation and joins a long line of bad wrestling video games for the consoles, and another bad game for the Simpsons franchise. Worst Simpsons wrestling game ever. This entry will be contentious because I know a lot of people like these games, however I do not. The Wwf Arcade Game series featured two games, Wwf Wrestlemania and In Your House. The two games were released by Acclaim in 1995 and 1996 respectively. They feature an over-the-top arcade gameplay and Mortal Kombat-style graphics, all courtesy of Midway Development. I'm all for arcade-style gameplay, but these games are just boring. Ironically, WWF Wrestlemania the arcade game received an award for Best 32X Game of 1995, which is like saying Best Bowel Movement. The sequel, In Your House, is worse than the first installment. It was not heavily promoted as Acclaim was going through some financial difficulties via lawsuits and controversy. WCW Nitro, published by THQ and developed by Inland Production. This game was released in 1998 on the PlayStation, N64, and PC. It was nothing to write home about. The game captures some of the feel of Nitro, but the gameplay is lacking. Regardless, it was a PlayStation greatest hit.
You gotta be able to walk that aisle and style and profile. Woo!
This is Big Sexy, or otherwise known as Sexy Jesus. Pick another game. I'm begging you, pick another game!
Didn't like Nitro? Let's give it some cocaine and call it WCW Thunder. Yeah, that's pretty much what they did.
If you ain't all jacked up, then hit the brick.
This footage hasn't been sped up. This is the actual gameplay, and it's straight up doo-doo.
Yeah, I'm the Macho Man Randy Savage. Don't make a big mistake. Get with the madness. That's what you want to do. Oh, yeah. You know, I tricked you before, I'm gonna trick you again, but this time, the torture is gonna last longer on the Hollywood Walk of Shame.
Hey, yo. This game is worse than the first one. You want a war?
For the late 90s, early 2000s Acclaim wrestling engine, these games looked good from a graphics perspective, but the gameplay was robotic and frustrating. Wwf War Zone, WWF Attitude, and ECW Anarchy Rules were pretty much the same game. And well, that game sucked.
Hello everybody! We were recently sued, so we have changed our name to Jefferson Webster Entertainment. Let's get down to the ring for some action.
This is the first ever WWF wrestling game released in 1989. We bought this game when it came out at the full retail price of probably around $50, and I couldn't be more disappointed. The roster and music are fine, however everything else is trash. The gameplay is terrible. It's difficult to hit your opponent, and there's a lot of random rules about energy on when you can pin and body slam people. Garbage.
It's the Macho Man Randy Savage coming at you, and I want to let you know that this game sucks. You know what doesn't suck? Slim Jims, baby, yeah, sniff into it!
The Ea Wcw Engine. These games were the only Ea Wcw games ever made. Released in 1999 and 2000, these games were simply inferior to other games during the time and pretty much broken. The hit detection and lack of moves make these games hard to play. These flaws are magnified with the sequel Backstage Assault. This game doesn't even seem like it was finished. Consequently, it only sold 200,000 copies, leading to the cancellation of the PlayStation 2 port. Ironically, Backstage Assault 2 was under development, but we'll talk more about that later.
Uh-oh, this doesn't look good!
No, it doesn't look good. Released on the SNES in 1994, there's a lot of things to like about this game. Good graphics, 12 fictional wrestlers to choose from, and 60 moves as well as finishers. And this game might be good for some, but I simply cannot get around what they've done here. It's unplayable for me. I feel like I'm going to have a seizure. I mean, look at this. They should have a motion sickness warning on the game. Hulk Hogan main event. Yeah, the panic button is right. Now, most Kinect games are bad. However, you have to be pretty lousy to be the creme of the crep. And Hulk Hogan main event definitely deserves to be in that conversation. Released in 2011, this game was an absolute cash grab for the Hulkster. The game doesn't use the Kinect controls well, and ultimately is a frustrating and boring experience. Now that Terry has that Gawker money, perhaps we will not see things like this from him in the future.
Well, let me tell you something, brother. Terry Bollea took money for video games, but Hulk Hogan did not, brother. What you gonna do when the 24-inch pythons run wild on you?
Earlier I defended the LJN SNES games, however the ones on the NES were terrible. Wrestlemania Challenge is a bad camera angle game where you can't hit anyone. The King of the Ring game was the best of the three that they made on the NES, however it's too easy, you basically can just stomp a guy to death. Let's look at Wrestlemania Steel Cage. I'm going to show you the first time I've ever played it.
Hey Enzo, what's your least favorite wrestling video game?
My least favorite wrestling video game of all time, Enzo Amore, is going to have to say the first video game that I was in because they gave me a yellow beard and I only wore that for one episode of NXT TV tapings. And it was on a bet. So they saw that and they made it into my video game character, which was a letdown.
Tecmo Wrestling is a good one for the NES, and the first game to feature commentary, albeit text only. However, given that it was developed in Japan, some of the translations aren't so great. Either way, a solid wrestling game. Now, a lot of people have trashed this trilogy of games released from 1992 to 1994 because of its ties to LJN, but these games are fun. I'm talking about WWF Wrestlemania, Royal Rumble, and Raw. Sure, they aren't perfect. I can remember getting blisters on my fingers from tie-ups in the game, but these can be mitigated with the Turbo controller. I like the graphics, roster, and gameplay. The final game of the series, Raw, was definitely the best. You can use the multi-tap for 4-player action, knock out the ref, finishing moves, and finally, 2 words, the Pale. Saturday Night Slam Masters was released in 1993. This is a lesser-known game from Capcom, but a good one. It features co-op and up to 4 players using the multi-tap. It's one of those pick-up and put-down games with simple gameplay. The game has finishers and a battle royal. It also has Hager from Final Fight. Check this one out if you've never played it. Hardcore wrestling fans are not going to like this one, and I would have it higher on my list, but there is a learning curve to these games. The Fire Pro series began back in 1989, and these games are still being developed today. The series started out in Japan and has slowly made its way to the US over the last 2 decades. I think it would have made it to the US sooner had it not been for a controversial plot in Super Fire Pro Wrestling Special back in 1994. The ending of that game, holy cats, it's some dark stuff, guys. Regardless, there's a ton of these games and they're comprehensive with respect to moves, match types, and create a wrestler. The sky's the limit. I only own 4 of these games, so perhaps the more I play them, then the more they could move up on my list. Hey Hacksaw, what do you think about these Japanese games?
USA! USA!
This is one of my favorite arcade games of all time. I remember driving my bike with pockets full of quarters to the local Walmart to play this one. It may not look like it now, but this game blew minds when it was released in 1991. The cabinet allowed up to 4 players and they offered a Royal Rumble option but also a tag tournament. The graphics, gameplay, cutscenes, rosters, and special moves all made this game great. In 2012, THQ made a remake on mobile devices, but you just can't recreate this kind of magic on a cell phone.
Ladies and gentlemen, we were recently served papers by the E channel for our logo, so right now our trademark is pending. Let's get down to the ring for some action.
Released on the PlayStation 2 in 2003, this was the crown jewel of Wwf's development for the SmackDown series. The game introduces a complex grappling system while maintaining fast gameplay. There are a variety of match types and a large roster of current wrestlers, but also some legends. This game still holds up today and is pretty fun. Pick it up if you find it.
We're fat men who help Lesnar talk. More! We're money for Brock's appearance. Brock like money.
Pro Wrestling was published by Nintendo and released in 1987. This game is one of my favorite black box games and also one of my favorite Nintendo games of all time. The game was developed solely by Masada Masuda, who years later would work on the creation of the Fire Pro series. Pro Wrestling was the first wrestling game to feature a referee and cameraman. I still like this game today. EA began working on a sequel to WCW Backstage Assault, and the game was being developed by AKI. Screenshots for the game were even published in an issue of PlayStation Magazine in May of 2000. Everyone was aligned for this to be a home run until this happened.
I own WCW.
With EA's WCW contract null and void, the company pivoted to create the Def Jam series. The move was risky for EA, but it paid off. These games are awesome. Released on a variety of consoles from 2003 to 2007, it makes you wonder what if WCW wasn't bought out. Last year, Def Jam Recording's Twitter account began sending some cryptic tweets, indicating that there may be a new Def Jam video game coming. Time will tell. WWE All-Stars. Released in 2011, this game is the best arcade wrestling game ever made. The game has some limitations of match types and create a wrestler features, but makes up for it with graphics, gameplay, and rosters. Many developers had previously worked on the TNA Impact game, and ironically the game was produced by Sal DeVita from Midway, who was responsible for WWF Wrestlemania the arcade game. I really wish they'd make a sequel to this game. It is an absolute blast. Other than my #1 entry up next, this is the perfect pick up and play wrestling video game. The AKI engine changed wrestling games forever. I still remember being jealous of kids who had a PlayStation when WCW vs. the World was released. It was the best wrestling game at the time on the PlayStation. However, development soon transitioned over to the N64, bringing us some of the greatest wrestling games ever made. WCW NWO World Tour, WCW NWO Revenge, WrestleMania 2000, Virtual Pro Wrestling, and No Mercy. AKI would go on to create Ultimate Muscle on the GameCube and the Def Jam series of games which I've previously mentioned. We can only speculate what the engine would be like today if they continued advancing gameplay, graphics, match type, and story modes. Unfortunately, we haven't seen an AKI wrestling game in over a decade.
Hey Enzo, what's your favorite wrestling video game?
My favorite video game of all time is Raw for Super Nintendo. How you doing? No Mercy, close second, though. No Mercy, close second.
Legends of Wrestling series. Conceptually, this game is a great idea. Getting legends from all the different organizations in one video game? I'm on board. However, the execution, well... 3 games were released from this series from 2002 to 2004 on the GameCube, PlayStation 2, and Xbox.
Bullshit, Hulk Hogan! Right. I'm the red. You're a real champion.
Every iteration of the game got a little bit better, but other than the concept, there's nothing to really say about this game. It just sucks. Everything falls flat from the gameplay to the graphics to the game modes.
Weighing 312 pounds, the WWE champion, Hulk Hogan.
Legends of Wrestlemania. They were so close with this one. I have to admit, when I watch the recreations of classic moments, I do get amped up. Unfortunately, Ukes ruined the controls with this one with that QuickTime garbage. Here's a bad entry on the NES, Tag Team Wrestling. I kept it out of my top 10 worst because it was a 1984 arcade game ported to the NES. It's not great. Fire Pro on the PS3 and 360, a rare miss for the series and more of a cash grab. The game really angered hardcore Fire Pro fans, but ultimately it did more harm than good. WWE on the Nintendo Switch. I don't own this one, but from what I gather on YouTube, they probably shouldn't have tried to port this one. I hear bad things. WWE Day of Reckoning 2. I battled with putting this one in my top 10, however it's more obscure as it's only on the GameCube. Regardless, a good entry from Ukes. WWE 2K series. The overall series started back in 2000 with the SmackDown games and was led in development by Ukes and published by THQ from 2000 to 2013. However, when THQ went bankrupt in 2013, the game transitioned to 2K Sports and Visual Concepts took over on the development. The game looks amazing, and it's the closest thing we have to a wrestling simulation. However, I'm somewhat indifferent to this game. I just can't fully commit to it for some reason. Additionally, like other 2K Sports franchises, every annual installment is nearly identical to the previous. Power Move Wrestling is probably the most underrated wrestling game of all time. It was America's first introduction to Ukes, and had it not been for WCW vs. the World, this may have cracked my top 10 best. Let's do a quick recap of my least favorite and favorite wrestling video games. Finally, YouTuber Stephen Reese, also known as Archon 1981, has recently acquired an unreleased NES wrestling game from an old Nintendo tester. The game is called UWC, which stands for Universal Wrestling Corporation, a name used during the acquisition of what would become Ted Turner's World Championship Wrestling, WCW. It looks like it was created in 1989 and has wrestlers such as Sting, Ric Flair, and the Road Warriors. The game doesn't look particularly great, but hey, it's just cool to see an unreleased NES game see the light of day after 30 years of collecting dust. And I have to say that the best part about this story is that Steven has recently released the ROM file to the public. So if you check out the link below, you can get more information on the game and actually how to play the ROM file.
Alright guys, that's it. Breezes, take us out.
What's up, guys? It is Breezes here, and I just wanted to let you know that you're watching Jefferson Webster's YouTube channel. Check it out. Check it out. Tell us what you think.